The silence in Le Jardin, the city's most exclusive restaurant, was usually broken only by the clinking of crystal and hushed whispers. But tonight, the silence was heavy, terrifying, and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that happens when a predator walks into a room. Luciano Moretti, the man who owned half the city and destroyed the other half, sat at the center table. But the most dangerous man in New York wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a screaming baby. And no one, absolutely no one, dared to breathe, until a waitress, who had nothing left to lose, walked up to the table where angels feared to tread and changed everything. Amelia wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, careful not to smear the makeup she had rushed to apply in the break-room bathroom. Her feet throbbed. It was only 8 p.m., but the double shift at Le Jardin felt like a marathon through quicksand. She adjusted her apron, checked her reflection in the polished brass of the kitchen doors, and took a deep breath. Table 4 needs water, and Table 7 wants the sommelier, whispered Sarah, another waitress, her face pale, and he is here. Amelia didn't have to ask who he was. The atmosphere in the dining room had shifted instantly. The air, usually smelling of truffle oil and expensive perfume, now smelled of cold, metallic fear. Amelia pushed through the swinging doors. There, at the best table in the house, the one usually reserved for senators and visiting royalty, sat Luciano Moretti. The newspapers called him a property developer. The streets called him the Wolf. He was terrifyingly handsome, with sharp features carved from granite and eyes the color of a stormy ocean. But tonight, those eyes looked frantic. Surrounding him were 4 men in dark suits. They were massive, their jackets bulging slightly at the armpits, scanning the room with predator eyes. But the center of attention wasn't the bodyguards, or even Luciano himself. It was the baby in his arms. The child, no more than 10 months old, was screaming. It wasn't just a cry. It was a high-pitched, red-faced wail of pure distress that cut through the restaurant like a siren. Guests stared at their plates, terrified to look up. The maitre d', a haughty Frenchman named Claude, was wringing his hands in the corner, looking as if he might faint. "Make him stop!" Luciano hissed to one of his men, his voice a low growl that vibrated with exhaustion. "Dominic, do something!" Dominic, a man with a scar running down his jaw, who looked like he could break a brick with his forehead, looked helpless. "Boss, I don't know what to do. Maybe he's hungry." "I fed him the bottle," Luciano snapped, rocking the child awkwardly. The motion was too stiff, too aggressive. He was a man used to controlling outcomes, used to forcing the world to bend to his will, but a baby couldn't be intimidated. "He won't take it!" The baby's wails grew louder. A woman at a nearby table flinched, dropping her fork. Luciano's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. The woman froze, her husband grabbing her hand under the table. "Get the car," Luciano ordered, standing up. "We're leaving. This place is too loud." "Boss, the food just arrived," Dominic mumbled. "I said get the car," Luciano roared. The baby screamed harder at the sudden noise. Amelia watched from the service station. She saw something the others didn't. She didn't see a mob boss. She didn't see a killer. She saw a father who was terrified. She saw a man who was drowning in a situation he couldn't shoot his way out of. And she saw the baby. The child wasn't just crying. He was arching his back, his tiny hands grasping at the rough fabric of Luciano's suit jacket, looking for purchase, looking for softness, and finding only expensive Italian wool and muscle. Without thinking, a habit that had gotten her into trouble her whole life, Amelia grabbed a clean cloth napkin and walked towards the center table. "Amelia, don't!" Claude hissed from the shadows. "You'll get us all killed." She ignored him. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her feet kept moving. As she approached the table, the bodyguard stepped in, blocking her path. Dominic placed a massive hand on her chest. "Back off, sweetheart," Dominic rumbled. Luciano looked up, his eyes wild. "What do you want? I didn't ask for service." Amelia didn't look at the bodyguards. She looked straight at Luciano. "He's not hungry, Mr. Moretti, and he's not sick." Luciano paused, the baby still shrieking in his arms. "Who are you?" "I'm just a waitress," Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "But I know that cry. He's overstimulated. The lights, the noise, your stress. He feels it all." "My stress?" Luciano scoffed, though his grip on the child tightened. "I don't have stress. I handle problems. This isn't a problem you can handle with muscle," Amelia said softly. She stepped around Dominic, who was too stunned by her audacity to stop her. She stood directly in front of the most dangerous man in the city. "May I?" She held out her arms. The room went silent. The only sound was the baby's ragged breathing between screams. Luciano looked at her outstretched arms, then at his son's purple, tear-stained face. He looked exhausted. For a split second, the mask of the Don slipped, revealing a desperate widower. "If you drop him," Luciano whispered, his voice lethal, "you won't make it to the exit." "I won't drop him," Amelia said. Luciano hesitated, then awkwardly passed the bundle over. As soon as Amelia took the baby, she didn't just hold him. She adjusted her entire posture. She softened her shoulders. She nestled the baby's head into the crook of her neck, turning him away from the bright chandelier lights and the scary faces of the bodyguards. She began to sway, a rhythmic, hypnotic motion, and she hummed a low, vibrating sound deep in her throat. "Shh, it's okay, Leo. It's just noise," she whispered, guessing the name she had seen stitched on the diaper bag earlier. "You're safe. You're okay." She walked a few paces away from the table, creating a small bubble of calm. She rubbed circles on the baby's back, finding the tension knotting his tiny muscles. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The screaming stopped. It tapered into a few wet whimpers, then a deep, shuddering sigh. The baby, Leo, went limp against Amelia's chest, his thumb finding his mouth. His eyes, heavy and wet, closed. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't fearful anymore. It was stunned. Amelia turned back to the table. Luciano was standing, his mouth slightly open, his hands hanging empty at his sides. He looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in the arms of a stranger in a cheap uniform. Amelia walked back and gently transferred the sleeping child into the stroller beside the table. She tucked the blanket in with practiced precision. "He was just terrified," Amelia said quietly, meeting Luciano's gaze. "He didn't need a bottle. He didn't need a toy. He just needs a mum." The words hung in the air like smoke. Luciano's face hardened instantly. The pain that flashed across his eyes was so raw it almost knocked Amelia back. She didn't know the story, that his wife, Isabella, had died 3 months ago giving birth to Leo, but she felt the ghost of it in his reaction. "He doesn't have a mother," Luciano said, his voice cold as ice. "Then he needs the next best thing," Amelia replied, refusing to back down. "He needs softness. You're holding him like he's a package, Mr. Moretti. You have to hold him like he's a piece of your own heart living outside your body." Luciano stared at her. He analyzed her. He looked at her frayed shoes, the tired circles under her eyes, the way her hands were red from washing dishes. He saw poverty, but he also saw a spine of steel. "What is your name?" he asked. "Amelia," she said. "Amelia Rossi." Luciano reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a money clip that was thicker than a Bible. He peeled off a stack of $100 bills, easily $2,000, and tossed them onto the table. "For your trouble, Amelia Rossi." Amelia looked at the money. She needed it. God, she needed it. Her rent was late, and her brother's rehab bills were piling up on her kitchen counter like a monument to failure. But something in the way he tossed it, like she was a vending machine that had dispensed a service, made her blood boil. She didn't touch the money. "I didn't do it for the tip," she said. "I did it for the baby. Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Moretti." She turned and walked away, her back straight, feeling the eyes of the wolf burning a hole between her shoulder blades. The rest of the shift was a blur. Claude, the manager, scolded her for harassing the VIPs, but didn't fire her, mostly because Luciano hadn't ordered her execution right there in the linguine. By the time Amelia punched out at 1 a.m., her legs felt like lead. She changed into her street clothes, jeans and a worn-out sweater, and exited through the back alley. The cool night air felt good against her flushed skin. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from the clinic, 1 text from her landlord. Pay by tomorrow or get out. She sighed, leaning her head against the brick wall for a moment. Just keep swimming, she whispered to herself. She pushed off the wall and started walking towards the subway station. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a flickering yellow street lamp. "Amelia." The voice came from the shadows. It wasn't Luciano. It was raspy, ugly. Amelia froze. She knew that voice. 3 men stepped out from behind a dumpster. The leader, a man with rotting teeth and a baseball bat leaning casually against his shoulder, grinned. It was Vinny, the rat, a loan shark who had bought her brother's debt. "Vinny," Amelia said, clutching her purse, "I told you, I get paid on Friday." "Friday was 2 days ago, doll," Vinny spat. He tapped the bat against his palm. "We're tired of waiting. Your brother, he took off. Vanished. That makes his debt your debt." "I'm paying you," Amelia cried, backing up. "I'm working double shifts. Please just give me 1 more week." "No more weeks," Vinny said, stepping closer. "Maybe we take a down payment out of you instead. You got a pretty face. Shame if it got messy." Amelia turned to run, but the other 2 men blocked her path. She was trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She looked around for a weapon, a bottle, anything. Vinny raised the bat. Suddenly, blinding white headlights flooded the alleyway. An engine roared, a deep, guttural sound of pure power. A massive black Cadillac Escalade tore down the narrow alley, screeching to a halt inches from Vinny's legs. The doors flew open. Before Vinny could even process what was happening, 2 men were on him. It was Dominic and another bodyguard from the restaurant. The violence was swift and silent. Dominic grabbed the bat, twisted it out of Vinny's hand, and slammed Vinny face first into the brick wall. The other 2 thugs were on the ground, guns pressed to the back of their heads. The back door of the SUV opened. Luciano Moretti stepped out. He was still wearing his impeccable suit, but he had removed his tie. He looked like a king surveying a battlefield of peasants. He walked past the groaning thugs and stopped in front of Amelia. She was shaking, pressed against the dirty wall, her eyes wide. "Mr. Moretti," she gasped. Luciano ignored her for a second. He looked at Vinny, who was bleeding from the nose. "Do you know who this woman is?" Luciano asked calmly. "No, I swear. She owes me money," Vinny squealed. "She works for me," Luciano lied smoothly. "And nobody touches my property." He turned to Dominic. "Explain the rules of the neighborhood to these gentlemen." Loudly. "Yes, boss." Luciano turned his back on the violence that was about to ensue and looked at Amelia. "Get in the car." "What? No," Amelia stammered. "I can't. Thank you for saving me, but I'm going home." "You don't have a home," Luciano said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I had my associates look into you while I ate my dinner, Amelia. You're 3 months behind on rent. Your brother owes $40,000 to the cartel wannabes, currently getting their ribs broken behind me. You have $11 in your bank account." Amelia felt exposed, violated. "You had no right to—" "I have every right," Luciano interrupted, stepping closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger. "Because I have a problem, and you are the solution." "I'm a waitress," she said defiantly. "Not anymore," Luciano stated. "My son hasn't slept more than 2 hours a night since his mother died. Tonight, with you, he slept through dinner. He's still sleeping in the car seat." Luciano leaned in, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "I am offering you a job. Live-in nanny. You will care for Leo. You will live at my estate. You will be available 24/7. "I can't live with a mobster," Amelia hissed. "I want a normal life. You have no life, Luciano snapped, his patience fraying. You have debt and death waiting for you in this alley. Come with me, and I pay off the debt. All of it. Tonight. Plus $5,000 a week. Cash. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. $5,000 a week. It was life-changing money. It was freedom, but the cost was selling her soul to the devil. She looked past him. Dominic was wiping blood off his knuckles. Vinny was unconscious. She looked at the tinted window of the SUV, where a motherless child was sleeping. If I say no, she whispered. Then I get back in my car, Luciano said simply, and I leave you here with Vinny when he wakes up. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Amelia looked at her worn-out sneakers. She looked at the dark alley. Then she looked at the open door of the armored car. Fine, she said, her voice shaking. But I have conditions. Luciano smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Get in the car, Amelia. We'll discuss your conditions on the way home. The drive to the Moretti estate took 40 minutes. They left the grimy streets of the city and entered a world of iron gates and long, winding driveways. The estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion, high stone walls topped with cameras, armed guards patrolling the perimeter with Dobermans, and a main house that looked like a museum. Amelia sat in the back, as far away from Luciano as possible. Leo was still asleep in his car seat between them. First condition, Amelia said, breaking the silence. I am the nanny. That is it. I don't see anything illegal. I don't hear anything illegal. And you never, ever touch me. Luciano looked out the window, watching the trees blur by. I have plenty of women who want me to touch them, Amelia. You don't need to worry about your virtue. As for the business, you stay on the 3rd floor. The nursery and your suite are there. My office is on the 1st floor. Stay out of my office, and you won't see anything you shouldn't. Second condition, she continued, my brother. You find him. You get him into a real rehab center, not the state-run ones, a good one. Luciano nodded once. Done. He'll be in a clinic in Switzerland by tomorrow morning. The car stopped in front of the massive oak doors. A team of servants was already waiting. As Amelia stepped out carrying Leo, she felt the weight of the house pressing down on her. It was beautiful, cold, and lonely. Welcome to purgatory, a voice sneered. Amelia turned to see a man leaning against a stone pillar, smoking a cigarette. He was younger than Luciano, perhaps late 20s, with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than Amelia's entire existence. But unlike Luciano's cold stoicism, this man had eyes that danced with malice. Marco, Luciano said, his voice tightening. Put the cigarette out. The baby is here. Marco took a long drag, exhaling the smoke in Amelia's direction. So this is the miracle worker, the one who tamed the brat. He looked Amelia up and down with a lecherous grin. Not bad, Enzo. A bit skinny for my taste, but I see the appeal. She is staff, Marco, Luciano warned, stepping between them. She is off-limits. To everyone. Especially you. I'm just being friendly, Marco laughed, dropping the cigarette and crushing it with his Italian leather shoe. I'm Marco, the uncle, the underboss, the fun one. Amelia held Leo tighter. She instinctively didn't like Marco. He smelled like trouble. Not the direct, honest danger of Luciano, but something slippery. A snake in the grass. Amelia, she said curtly. Take him upstairs, Luciano ordered Amelia. Mrs. Gable will show you to your room. Mrs. Gable, a stern-faced housekeeper, who looked like she hadn't smiled since 1980, appeared and beckoned Amelia. As Amelia walked up the grand marble staircase, she heard the brothers arguing below. Why is she here, Enzo? Marco's voice hissed, echoing in the foyer. We have business to discuss. The shipment from the docks is delayed. The Russians are agitated, and you're bringing stray cats home. My son needs stability, Marco, Luciano shouted back. And if you call her a stray again, I'll cut your tongue out. You're soft, Marco spat. Ever since Isabella died, you've gone soft. The wolf is losing his teeth. Maybe it's time for a new alpha. There was a loud thud, like a body being slammed against a wall. Amelia froze on the landing, clutching the sleeping baby. "Say that again." Luciano's voice was a low, deadly whisper. "Say it, and I'll bury you in the foundation of this house." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps walking away. Amelia hurried up the stairs, her heart racing. She entered the nursery, a room larger than her entire apartment, filled with expensive toys that had never been played with. She laid Leo down in the crib. He stirred, opening his eyes. He looked up at her, blinking, confused by the new surroundings. "It's okay," Amelia whispered, stroking his soft cheek. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She looked around the opulent room. She was safe from the loan sharks. Her brother was getting help. She was rich. But as she looked out the window at the armed guards patrolling the garden, she realized the truth. She had traded one cage for another. This one was just made of gold. And inside the house, the wolves were already fighting over who would lead the pack. She had walked straight into a war zone, holding a baby as her only shield. 3 weeks passed. The Moretti estate, once a mausoleum of silence and grief, began to change. It started quietly, the sound of a lullaby drifting down the hallway, the smell of baby powder replacing the scent of cigar smoke, the sight of colorful stuffed animals scattered in the austere living room. Amelia had established a routine. She woke up at 6 a.m., fed Leo, and took him for a walk in the highly secured gardens. She avoided Marco, who watched her like a hawk from the balcony, and she barely saw Luciano. The Don left before dawn and returned after dark, his face often bruised, his knuckles often raw, but the tension in the house was growing. One rainy Tuesday, Amelia was in the kitchen making formula. The house was empty, or so she thought. The staff had been dismissed early by Marco for a security sweep, which felt like a lie. As she shook the bottle, she heard a noise from Luciano's office. The door, usually locked with a biometric scanner, was slightly ajar. Amelia knew the rules. Stay out of the office. But a strange sound, like paper tearing and drawers being rifled through, pulled at her curiosity. She crept down the hallway, clutching the baby monitor like a weapon. She peeked through the crack. It wasn't Luciano. It was Marco. He was at Luciano's desk, frantic, photographing documents with his phone. He opened the safe behind the painting. He knew the combination. Inside, he didn't take cash. He took a small, black ledger. "Finally," Marco whispered, a cruel smile twisting his face. "Checkmate, brother." Amelia stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to flee, but her sneaker squeaked against the polished marble floor. Marco's head snapped up. "Who's there?" Amelia ran. She didn't look back. She sprinted towards the stairs, intending to grab Leo and lock herself in the nursery. "Amelia!" Marco's voice was a roar. She made it to the landing, but Marco was faster. He lunged, grabbing her by the arm and spinning her around. He pinned her against the banister, his face inches from hers. He smelled of whiskey and betrayal. "What did you see?" he hissed, his grip bruising her skin. "Nothing. I was just getting milk." Amelia lied, her voice trembling. "You're lying," Marco sneered. "You're the little spy, aren't you? Did Enzo put you up to this? Did he bring you here to watch me?" "He brought me here to watch his son," Amelia cried. "Let me go." "His son," Marco laughed darkly. "The heir to the throne. The reason Isabella died. You know, it should have been me. I was the one who made the deals. I was the one who kept the Russians happy while Luciano played happy family. And now he thinks he can push me out?" He tightened his grip on her throat. "I could snap your neck right here. Make it look like you fell. A tragic accident. The clumsy waitress. Get your hands off her." The voice was calm, quiet, and absolutely terrifying. Marco froze. He looked down the stairs. Luciano was standing at the front door, rain dripping from his black trench coat. Dominic stood behind him, holding a shotgun. Luciano didn't shout. He didn't run. He walked up the stairs with a slow, deliberate pace that promised violence. Marco released Amelia, backing away with his hands up. "Enzo, I was just... She was snooping. I caught her near the office." Luciano reached the landing. He looked at Amelia, checking her for injuries. He saw the red handprints on her arm. His eyes went black. He turned to his brother. Crack! Luciano's fist connected with Marco's jaw so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Marco crumpled to the floor, spitting blood. "I told you," Luciano said, adjusting his cufflink. "She is off limits." "You chose a servant over your blood?" Marco spat, wiping his mouth. "You're weak, Enzo. The families see it. Sergei Volkov sees it. You're going to lose everything." "Get out," Luciano said. "Get out of my house. If I see you here again, I won't treat you like a brother. I'll treat you like a trespasser." Marco stood up, swaying unsteadily. He looked at Amelia with pure hatred. "This isn't over. Enjoy the baby while you can, sweetheart." Marco stormed out, slamming the heavy front door. The silence returned, but it was heavier now. Luciano turned to Amelia. The adrenaline left her, and she began to shake. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No," she whispered. He took something. From your safe. A black book. Stole." Luciano's face went pale. For the first time, the wolf looked afraid. "The ledger," he muttered. "He has the roots, the accounts. He's going to sell us out to Volkov." He looked at Amelia, and suddenly the distance between them vanished. He grabbed her shoulders, not in anger, but in desperation. "Pack a bag," he ordered. "You and Leo. Tonight. I'm moving you to the safe house." "No," Amelia said, surprising herself. Luciano blinked. "Excuse me?" "If we run, he wins," Amelia said, her voice gaining strength. "He wants you to be afraid. He wants you to hide. You're Luciano Moretti. You don't hide. You don't understand," Luciano shouted, raking a hand through his wet hair. "This isn't a street fight, Amelia. This is war. Volkov is a butcher. If Marco gives him that book, they will come for us. They will come for Leo to get to me." "Then let them come," Amelia said, "and we'll be ready." She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his chest. His heart was racing. "You're not alone anymore, Luciano. You have Dominic. You have your men. And you have me to watch Leo. I won't let anyone touch him." Luciano looked down at her hand on his chest. He covered it with his own. His hand was large, scarred and warm. "Why do you care?" he whispered. "I kidnapped you from an alley. I forced you into this life." "You saved me," Amelia corrected him softly. "And Leo, he's the first thing I've loved in a long time that didn't hurt me back." Luciano leaned in. The air between them crackled with electricity. His face was inches from hers. She could feel his breath on her lips. He wanted to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes. The hunger, the loneliness. But he pulled back. "I can't," he rasped. "I can't drag you deeper into this." He turned and walked toward his office, shouting for Dominic. "Lock down the estate. Triple the guard. No one comes in or out without my say-so." Amelia stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. The war had begun. 2 days later, the attack came. But it didn't come with guns blazing at the front gate. It came with a Trojan horse. It was Leo's first birthday. Luciano, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, had insisted on a small dinner. Just the staff, Dominic, and a few trusted lieutenants. The house was secure. The windows were bulletproof. The perimeter was swarming with guards. Amelia had dressed Leo in a tiny tuxedo. He was laughing, clapping his hands as he sat in his high chair, smashing a piece of cake. Luciano sat at the head of the table, actually smiling. For a moment, they looked like a real family. Then the lights went out. "Down!" Dominic screamed, flipping the table over. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing the room in a dim red light. "The security system is down," a guard yelled into his radio. "Someone hacked the system from the inside." Marco. Glass shattered in the foyer. Gunfire erupted from the kitchen. They were already inside. "Amelia, take Leo!" Luciano roared, pulling a silver handgun from his holster. "Go to the panic room, now!" Amelia grabbed Leo from the high chair. The baby started to cry, terrified by the sudden chaos. She clutched him to her chest and ran towards the hidden door behind the bookcase in the library. "Dominic, cover the hall!" Luciano shouted, firing 2 shots into the darkness. A man in tactical gear fell from the balcony. Amelia made it to the library. She fumbled for the switch to open the panic room. Click. Nothing happened. "It's disabled," she screamed. "Damn it!" Luciano sprinted into the library, reloading his weapon. "They've overridden the controls. We have to go to the garage. The armored car." "Luciano!" A voice boomed from the hallway. It was a thick Russian accent. "Sergei Volkov, give us the boy, Moretti, and we let you live." "Over my dead body," Luciano yelled back. "That can be arranged." Bullets shredded the library door. Luciano pushed Amelia behind a heavy oak desk. "Stay down," he commanded. "There's too many of them," Amelia whispered, looking at the 3 guards who were already dead in the hallway. Luciano looked at her. His face was smeared with soot, but his eyes were clear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. "There is a service tunnel in the wine cellar," he said rapidly. "It leads to the old gardener's shed outside the wall. Take Leo, go. There's a car waiting there." "I'm not leaving you," Amelia cried. "You have to." Luciano grabbed her face. "You are the only one I trust with him. Please, Amelia, save my son." He kissed her. It was hard, desperate, and tasted of blood and goodbye. "Go." He pushed her toward the servant's door. Amelia ran. She heard Luciano yell a war cry, charging into the hallway to draw the fire away from her. She sprinted through the kitchen, slipping on broken plates. She reached the cellar door and threw it open. She ran down the stone steps into the damp darkness, the sound of gunfire fading above her. Leo was sobbing against her shoulder. "Shh, baby, shh," she panted. She found the tunnel entrance behind a wine rack. It was dark, filled with cobwebs. She crawled through, dragging herself and the baby for what felt like miles. Finally, she saw moonlight. She burst out into the cool night air near the edge of the forest. The gardener's shed was ahead, but as she ran towards the car parked there, a figure stepped out from the shadows. "Going somewhere, Nanny?" It was Marco. He was holding a pistol. He looked manic, his eyes wide with triumph. "I knew he'd send you this way," Marco grinned. "He's so predictable, always the martyr." Amelia froze. She held Leo tight. "Let us go, Marco. He's your nephew." "He's a loose end," Marco snapped. "Volkov wants the Moretti bloodline ended, and I want the throne. It's a fair trade." He raised the gun, aiming at Amelia's chest. "Put the baby down," Marco ordered. "I don't want to kill the kid, yet. I need him for leverage." Amelia looked at the gun. She looked at the dark forest. She looked at Marco's cruel face. She remembered what Luciano had said in the restaurant. "I handle problems." Amelia realized she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a victim. She was a mother lioness protecting her cub. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, Marco. You win." She knelt down slowly, as if to place Leo on the grass. "That's a good girl," Marco sneered, lowering the gun slightly as he watched her. Amelia's hand brushed the ground. Her fingers closed around a heavy, jagged rock the size of a grapefruit. "Here he is," she whispered. In one fluid motion, she didn't put Leo down. She lunged. She wasn't a trained assassin. She was a desperate woman from the Bronx who had fought off loan sharks and drunks her whole life. She threw the rock with every ounce of strength she possessed. It struck Marco square in the forehead. He grunted, stunned, the gun firing wildly into the air. He stumbled back. Amelia didn't stop. She charged him, using her body weight to knock him over. She kicked the gun away into the tall grass. Marco roared, grabbing her ankle. "You bitch!" He dragged her down. Leo rolled onto the soft grass, screaming. Marco scrambled on top of her, his hands going for her throat. I'm going to kill you!" Amelia clawed at his eyes. She bit his hand. She fought dirty. But he was stronger. His thumbs dug into her windpipe. Black spots danced in her vision. Bang! Marco stiffened. He looked down at his chest. A red flower was blooming on his white shirt. He collapsed on top of Amelia. Dead weight. Amelia shoved him off, gasping for air, coughing violently. She looked up. Luciano was standing at the edge of the woods. He was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, leaning heavily on Dominic. His gun was smoking. "I told you," Luciano wheezed, staring at his dead brother. "Stay away from her." The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and police sirens, police that were on Luciano's payroll, fortunately. Marco was gone. The break-in was framed as a robbery gone wrong. Volkov's men had fled when they realized their inside man was dead, and Luciano was still standing. Luciano was rushed to the private surgery suite in the estate's west wing. He had taken 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the thigh. Amelia sat in the hallway, holding a sleeping Leo. She was covered in dirt and Marco's blood. She refused to change. She refused to leave. Dominic sat beside her. His arm was in a sling. "You did good, kid," Dominic grunted. Most guys would have frozen. You got heart." "Is he going to die?" Amelia asked, her voice hollow. "The boss." Dominic chuckled painfully. "Nah, he's too stubborn to die. Plus, he has a reason to live now." The doctor came out 3 hours later. "He's stable. He's asking for you." Amelia walked into the room. Luciano looked pale, hooked up to IVs, but his eyes were open. They tracked her immediately. She walked to the bed and sat down. She placed Leo, who was finally calm, on the mattress beside his father. Luciano reached out with his good hand and touched Leo's foot. Then he looked at Amelia. "Marco?" he asked. "Dead," Amelia said. "You saved me. You saved yourself," Luciano corrected. "Dominic told me you took him down before I even took the shot. You're dangerous, Amelia Rossi." "I had to be," she said. Tears finally began to spill down her cheeks. "I was so scared. Not for me. For him." Luciano looked at her tears. He did something he had never done before. He reached up and wiped them away with his thumb. "Volkov is still out there," Luciano said, his voice serious. "The war isn't over. It's just beginning. I have to finish it. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be dangerous." He took a deep breath. "You have $2 million in an offshore account now. I set it up this morning. You can take Leo, go to Europe, go to Asia, disappear. I will find you when it's safe. Or, if I don't make it, you raise him. You raise him to be better than me." Amelia looked at the money he was offering. Freedom, safety, a life without gunfire and blood. She looked at Luciano, the man who had been a monster to the world but a savior to her, the man who looked at her not as a servant, but as an equal. "I'm not going anywhere," Amelia said firmly. "Amelia." "No," she cut him off. "You need a mum for him? Well, you got one. And you need someone to watch your back who isn't on the payroll. You got that too." She leaned down and kissed him, gently, carefully avoiding the oxygen tube. "We finish this together," she whispered. "We take down Volkov. And then we live." Luciano looked at her, awe in his eyes. "Together," he agreed. For the first month after the attack on the estate, the Moretti mansion was not a home. It was a high-tech hospital ward wrapped in a fortress. Luciano had survived, but the cost was high. The bullet in his shoulder had shattered the clavicle, and the one in his leg had missed the femoral artery by a fraction of an inch. He spent his days in a haze of pain and frustration, confined to the West Wing master suite. For Amelia, the world had shrunk to the size of this room. She slept on a chaise lounge near the window, Leo's portable crib beside her. She became the gatekeeper. No one entered without her permission. Not even the capos. Not even the lawyers. "He needs to rest," she told a frantic Dominic one Tuesday morning, blocking the mahogany doors with her slight frame. "Amelia, the families are circling like vultures," Dominic hissed, his arm still in a sling from the firefight. Volkov is telling everyone Luciano is on his deathbed. If the boss doesn't show his face, we lose the territory. We lose everything. If he shows his face now, he's a target, Amelia countered, her voice steady. Let Volkov think he's winning. Let him get comfortable. Dominic stared at her. The waitress from the diner was gone. In her place was a woman who spoke with the authority of a queen regent. You sound like him, Dominic muttered, half impressed, half terrified. Inside the room, Luciano was awake. He had heard everything. When Amelia entered with his lunch tray and Leo on her hip, Luciano was trying to sit up, his face grey with effort. Stop, Amelia ordered, putting the tray down and rushing to adjust his pillows. You're going to rip the stitches. Dominic is right, Luciano rasped, his voice gravelly from disuse. Volkov is making moves. He's seizing the shipping lanes. If I don't strike back— You will strike back, Amelia said, sitting on the edge of the bed. She spooned broth into a bowl, her movements precise. But not with a gun. Not yet. You're the wolf, Luciano. Wolves don't bark. They wait. Luciano looked at her. He looked at the way Leo was chewing on a plastic keyring, completely oblivious to the war surrounding him. I dragged you into hell, Amelia. And now you're redecorating it. Eat, she commanded gently. The turning point came in the 3rd month. Luciano was walking again, albeit with a cane and a heavy limp. The physical wounds were closing, but the strategic situation was dire. Sergei Volkov had become bold. He had scheduled a massive meeting, a peace summit, at a neutral warehouse in the meatpacking district. He had invited all the minor families to pledge allegiance to him, assuming Luciano Moretti was too weak to stop him. It was a coronation. We have to hit the summit, Luciano said, standing over a map in his study. The air was thick with cigar smoke. Dominic's, not his. We go in heavy. Machine guns. We burn it down. It's a suicide mission, Dominic argued. Volkov will have 50 men there. We have 20 who aren't injured. So what? We just let him take the city? Luciano slammed his hand on the table. No. A soft voice came from the doorway. They turned. Amelia was standing there. She wasn't wearing her nanny uniform. She was wearing a sleek black dress she had bought online, her hair pinned up. She looked like a Mafia wife. You don't go in heavy, Amelia said, walking into the room. You don't go in at all. Luciano frowned. Amelia, this is business. It's psychology, she corrected. Luciano, why did Volkov attack you? Because he feared you. Why does he think he's won? Because you've been silent. If you attack him with guns, you're just another gangster. You need to be a ghost. She placed a hand on the map, right over the location of the warehouse. What if the warehouse doesn't exist when he gets there? Luciano and Dominic exchanged a look. The building is owned by the shell company connected to the docks, Luciano mused, his eyes narrowing. We control the gas lines running underneath that block. And, Amelia added, a dangerous glint in her eyes, Leo's favorite cartoon taught me that if you want to catch a pest, you don't chase it. You put cheese in a trap and wait for the snap. Luciano stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It was the first time he had truly smiled in months. Dominic, Luciano said softly, get the demolition team and call the fire department anonymous tip line for about 9:05 p.m. The night of the summit, Amelia didn't hide in the panic room. She sat in the study with Luciano. A fire was crackling in the hearth. Leo was asleep upstairs. On the desk, a police scanner radio was crackling with static. 9 p.m., 9:02 p.m. Luciano held a glass of scotch, but he wasn't drinking it. His knuckles were white. If this goes wrong, he whispered, Dominic is dead, and they will come for us tonight. It won't go wrong, Amelia said. She reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm against his cold skin. You outsmarted them. 9:05 p.m. The radio exploded with noise. All units. Massive explosion reported at District 4. Multiple structural collapses. Fire is spreading. Luciano let out a breath he had been holding for 90 days. The phone on the desk rang. It was a burner phone. Only one person had the number. Luciano picked it up. "Report," Dominic's voice came through, sounding breathless but triumphant. "It's done, boss. Volkov was inside. They were all inside. The floor gave out into the basement, right where we rigged the gas main. There's nothing left but ash." Luciano closed his eyes. "And our men? All accounted for. We were 3 blocks away when it blew. Good work. Go dark. I'll see you tomorrow." Luciano hung up the phone. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fireplace. The war was over. The monster of the East, the man who had killed Marco and threatened Leo, was gone. Luciano looked at Emilia. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt a sudden, crushing weight of exhaustion. He slumped back in his leather chair, covering his face with his hands. "It's over," he whispered. Emilia stood up and walked to him. She didn't say a word. She simply pulled his hands away from his face and pulled his head against her stomach, holding him as she would hold Leo. He wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in the fabric of her dress. The wolf, the killer, the Don. He trembled. Not from fear, but from the release of a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. "You're safe," she whispered, stroking his hair. "We're safe." The transition from war to peace was harder than the war itself. For the next 2 months, Luciano struggled. He would wake up at 3 a.m., reaching for a gun that Emilia had removed from the nightstand. He would pace the hallways, checking locks that were already secured. He didn't know how to exist without an enemy. One afternoon, Emilia found him in the garden, staring at the high stone walls. He looked trapped. "You're doing it again," she said, approaching him with 2 cups of coffee. "Doing what?" "Looking for the cracks," she said, searching for the threat. Luciano took the coffee. "It's my job to look for threats, Emilia." "Not anymore," she said firmly. "Your job now is to figure out who Luciano Moretti is when he isn't fighting for his life." She whistled. From the patio, a golden retriever puppy, a gift Emilia had insisted on, came bounding towards them, tripping over its own paws. Leo, now a sturdy toddler with a mop of dark curls, waddled after the dog, shrieking with delight. "Dada, Dada!" Leo yelled, pointing at the dog. Luciano froze. It was the first time Leo had addressed him directly. Leo ran right past Emilia and slammed into Luciano's legs, wrapping his tiny arms around his father's knees. "Dada, doggy!" Luciano looked down. The stiffness in his shoulders melted. He carefully set his coffee on the garden wall and crouched down. He picked up his son. "Yeah, Leo," Luciano whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a doggy." Leo patted Luciano's cheek with a sticky hand. Emilia watched them. "See?" she said softly. "That's your job now." 6 months after the explosion that ended the Volkov Empire, the estate was unrecognizable. The heavy velvet drapes were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the sunlight flood in. The silence of the mausoleum had been replaced by the chaos of life. It was a warm evening. Emilia was sitting on a blanket in the center of the lawn. Luciano lay with his head in her lap, his eyes closed. "I've been thinking," Luciano said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That's dangerous," Emilia teased, running her fingers through his hair. "I'm thinking about the trust fund," he said. "For Leo, I want to restructure it. Legitimate investments only. Real estate, tech, green energy. No more shadow accounts." "That sounds boring," Emilia smiled, "and perfect." "I want to be bored," Luciano admitted. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. The grey storm in his irises had cleared. They were just blue now. "I want to be so bored that my biggest problem is crabgrass or Leo's math homework." He sat up, shifting so he was facing her. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a solemn intensity. "Emilia," he started, "I never asked you to stay. You just stayed. You saved my son. You saved my life. You saved my soul." "Luciano, let me finish," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I know I'm a difficult man. I know I come with baggage that would sink an ocean liner. But I look at you and I don't see a waitress. I don't see a nanny. I see the only person who ever looked the wolf in the eye and didn't blink." He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was not a diamond the size of a rock. That was what men like Marco gave their mistresses. This was a vintage ring, intricate gold with a deep blue sapphire. "This was my grandmother's," Luciano said. "She was the only woman my grandfather ever feared. It belongs to you." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Luciano, marry me," he said. "Not for the protection, not for the money. Marry me, because I can't breathe when you're not in the room." Amelia looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. She looked over at the porch, where Dominic was sitting in a rocking chair, watching Leo play, acting more like a grandfather than a bodyguard. She thought about the alleyway where they met, the screaming baby, the fear, the journey. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Luciano slid the ring onto her finger. He didn't kiss her immediately. He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, breathing her in. It was a moment of total surrender. "Sing it," he murmured against her skin. "Here? Now?" She laughed breathlessly. "Please," he said. "It's the only thing that makes the world stop spinning." Amelia smiled. She wrapped her arms around his neck. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, she began to hum. It wasn't just a melody to soothe a crying infant anymore. It was the anthem of their survival. "Hush now, baby. Don't you cry." Luciano Moretti, the man who owned the city, lay back down on the grass, holding the hand of his future wife, and listened. For the first time in the history of the Moretti bloodline, the gun was locked away, the enemies were gone, and the only sound in the garden was the lullaby of a love that had conquered the darkness. And that is how a single act of kindness in a crowded restaurant changed the fate of the most dangerous family in New York. Amelia didn't just save a crying baby that night. She saved a drowning man and found the strength she never knew she had. It proves that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a fist. It's love, patience, and the courage to step up when everyone else looks away. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of Amelia's choice to stay? Would you have taken the money and run? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.